Chapter 1: The Shadow of the Docks. The gas lamps of Baker Street cast long, shivering shadows across the rain-slicked pavement, their glow struggling against the encroaching gloom of a particularly dismal autumn evening. For several weeks, a rare tranquility had settled upon our humble rooms at 221B. Holmes, though still immersed in his perpetual studies, had found a temporary fascination in the intricate patterns of ancient Persian rugs, a pursuit that, while esoteric, at least offered a welcome respite from the more gruesome aspects of his usual inquiries. I, meanwhile, had devoted myself to catching up on my medical journals, finding a quiet satisfaction in the rhythmic scratch of my pen and the gentle hiss of the coal fire. This fragile piece, however, was destined to be shattered. The sharp rap upon our door, distinct from the lighter tap of Mrs. Hudson, bespoke an urgency that only certain callers ever possessed. Holmes, without looking up from a particularly faded floral design, remarked, "Lestrade, and he brings with him a colleague of some bureaucratic weight, if the measured cadence of his step is any indication." Indeed, it was. When Mrs. Hudson admitted them, the inspector stood on our threshold, his usually pugnacious features etched with a weariness I seldom witnessed. Beside him, a man of imposing stature, clad in the sober uniform of the Admiralty, waited with an air of strained patience. This, I quickly surmised, must be Sir Reginald Thorn, a name I recognized from naval dispatches. "Holmes, Watson," Lestrade began, his voice devoid of his usual bluster, "I apologize for this intrusion, but we are facing a predicament of the gravest sort. Sir Reginald here will attest to its urgency." Sir Reginald, a man whose bearing suggested a lifetime of command, offered a curt nod. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson." The Admiralty finds itself in an unenviable position. We have, in the past month, suffered a series of incidents which defy all rational explanation. Holmes finally set aside his magnifying glass, his grey eyes, now alight with a cold, intelligent gleam, fixing upon our visitors. "Incidents, Sir Reginald? Pray elaborate." "Fires, Mr. Holmes. 3 merchant vessels, in 3 different ports, utterly destroyed by fire. The Cormorant in Hull, the Sea Witch in Bristol, and most recently, just 3 nights ago, the Star of India here in London." Lestrade interjected, "And not a trace, Holmes. Not a whiff of paraffin, no broken windows, no suspicious characters seen fleeing. Just, puff. One moment a ship, the next a blazing inferno. They burn from the inside out," Sir Reginald reports, with an unnatural intensity. Holmes steepled his fingers, his gaze distant. "And the crews? The cargo?" "The crews, fortunately, were ashore, or able to escape with their lives," Thorne stated grimly. "As for the cargo, grain, timber, textiles. Nothing of exceptional value that would suggest piracy or targeted theft. No, Mr. Holmes, this is sheer, unadulterated destruction. And the most unsettling aspect is the utter randomness of it all. Different companies, different types of vessels, different docks. There is no pattern to discern, no common thread to pull." I observed Holmes closely. His initial expression of mild academic interest was slowly giving way to that peculiar tension which always preceded his deeper engagement. The randomness, which so perplexed Lestrade and Thorne, seemed to prick his intellectual curiosity. "Randomness, you say?" Holmes mused, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "Inspector, Sir Reginald, randomness is often the most carefully constructed facade. A chaotic tapestry woven to conceal a very deliberate design. Tell me, what economic impact has this randomness had?" Thorne cleared his throat. "Considerable, Mr. Holmes. Insurance premiums are soaring. Merchants are hesitant to commit cargo. There's talk of disruption to trade routes, a potential blow to the very backbone of our maritime economy. And with the increasing tensions on the continent, such instability is precisely what we can ill afford." Holmes rose from his armchair, his movement sudden and decisive, shattering the last vestiges of our domestic peace. "Precisely. This is not the work of some simple brigand, but of a mind that understands the delicate interplay of commerce and panic. You have, Sir Reginald, presented me with a problem of profound and fascinating complexity. Randomness, by its very nature, is difficult to predict. Yet, if it is indeed a calculated randomness, then its very calculated nature offers a vulnerability. Watson, fetch my travelling coat. It appears our quiet autumn evenings are at an end. We shall begin, I think, with the charred remains of your Star of India." Lestrade, a flicker of relief crossing his features, offered a grateful nod. Sir Reginald Thorne, however, still seemed slightly bewildered by Holmes's sudden transformation from detached observer to committed investigator. "As for myself, I simply made ready, knowing that where Holmes saw a calculated chaos, I would witness the thrilling, if sometimes dangerous, pursuit of order. The game, it seemed, was once again afoot." Chapter 2: The Charred Remains of the Star of India. The chill of the autumn night clung stubbornly to the London docks as Holmes and I, accompanied by a rather less enthusiastic Inspector Lestrade, made our way towards the designated berth. The air, thick with the familiar smell of tar and brackish water, was now overlaid with a new, acrid stench, the lingering breath of burnt wood, scorched metal, and something indefinably chemical. It hung heavy, a grim pall over the scene. The Star of India, once a proud merchantman, lay a skeletal wreck against the inky sky, its once sturdy timbers reduced to brittle charcoal, its metal superstructure twisted into grotesque, modern art. Fire crews, their faces smudged with soot and exhaustion, were still dousing smouldering sections, their hoses hissing against the dying embers. A cordon of constables kept a respectful distance, their lanterns casting dancing circles of light on the puddled ground. Lestrade gestured expansively towards the devastation. "There it is, Holmes. Or what's left of it. Caught fire just after midnight. Burned like a tinderbox, they say. Took 3 hours to bring it under control, and by then, well, you see." Holmes, however, paid little attention to Lestrade's lamentations. His eyes, keen and ceaseless, swept over the wreckage, absorbing every detail. He stepped over discarded hoses and shattered planks, his gaze fixed, not on the general destruction, but on the minutiae. I followed, accustomed to his purposeful silence, while Lestrade hovered uncertainly at the edge of the inferno. Our path led us eventually to a small knot of men, the fire chief, a man named Henderson, his uniform dishevelled, the ship's first mate, Mr. Davies, his face pale and drawn, and a port official, looking thoroughly overwhelmed. "Mr. Henderson, if you please," Holmes began, his voice calm amidst the chaos. "From your estimation, where did this conflagration originate?" The fire chief pointed a gloved finger towards the very heart of the vessel. "Deep in hold number 2, Mr. Holmes. Below the waterline, practically. It wasn't surface kindling, not from the decks. It erupted from within, with such ferocity that by the time we arrived, the entire hold was a furnace. It was almost as if the cargo itself had ignited simultaneously." "And what was the cargo in hold number 2? Holmes pressed, his head cocked slightly to one side. "Bales of cotton," Mr. Davies, the first mate, interjected, his voice raspy. "Bound for Bombay. Clean, dry cotton, loaded last week. No history of spontaneous combustion, I assure you." Holmes nodded slowly, then turned his attention back to the charred timbers within the hold. He produced his familiar magnifying glass, its lens gleaming in the gloom, and began a slow, methodical examination of the burn patterns. He knelt, he stooped, occasionally running a gloved finger along a section of fused metal or crumbling wood. He even, to Lestrade's visible discomfort, took a small, careful sniff of the air, not unlike a bloodhound on a scent. No signs of forced entry, no broken locks. Holmes asked, not looking up. "None, Mr. Holmes," the port official confirmed. Security was tight. No unauthorized personnel came aboard after loading was complete. Lestrade, ever eager to summarize the obvious, piped up, "It's baffling, Holmes. We've had our men go over every inch. No accelerants, no faulty electrical wiring reported, no smoldering cigarettes. Nothing to explain it. Just fire." Holmes finally straightened up, a peculiar intensity in his eyes. "Indeed, Inspector. The very lack of conventional evidence is, in itself, a form of evidence. It suggests a method designed to leave no trace, or a trace so subtle as to be overlooked by less discerning eyes." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the scene once more, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. "The fire chief mentions it erupted from within, with unusual ferocity. And the first mate confirms clean, dry cotton. Yet, look here." He pointed with a slender finger to a section of deck plating near the center of the second hold. The metal here was not merely warped, but blistered and discolored in a way that suggested an extreme, localized heat, almost as if something had exploded rather than merely burnt. And beneath it, still clinging to the charcoal of a support beam, was a minute, almost iridescent residue, barely visible against the blackness. "And this odor," Holmes murmured, taking another, deeper inhalation. "It is faint now, almost dissipated by the wind and the smoke, but distinct. A metallic tang, not of burning wood or oil, but something sharper. Something artificial. Neither Lestrade nor the fire chief seemed to detect anything beyond the general smell of devastation. They exchanged a bewildered glance. "It means nothing to me, Holmes," Lestrade admitted, scratching his head. "Just more of the same, I'm afraid. We're at a dead end." Holmes merely smiled, a slight, enigmatic curve of his lips. "A dead end, Inspector, is merely a point from which a new, less obvious path begins. There is a method to this madness, a cunning hand at work. The randomness, the ferocious speed, the utter lack of conventional evidence, these are not the hallmarks of an amateur. No, Watson, this is the work of a sophisticated mind, one that uses the very elements of destruction to cloak its tracks. And that, I assure you, makes the chase all the more exhilarating." He stooped one last time, carefully scraping a minute sample of the iridescent residue into a small, stoppered vial he produced from his waistcoat pocket. As we left the charred remains of the Star of India behind, Holmes's silence was no longer merely observant, but deeply contemplative. I knew then that his mind was already beginning to weave the first threads of a solution to this most perplexing and dangerous of cases. Chapter 3: A Spark in Liverpool. The next few days at Baker Street were fraught with a tension that hummed beneath the surface of Holmes's usual routines. He buried himself amidst maps of British ports, shipping manifests, and obscure treatises on industrial chemistry. Volumes were consulted, discarded, and then consulted again with renewed vigor. I often observed him, a distant look in his eyes, as if viewing a complex tapestry from a great height, searching for the single, frayed thread that would unravel the whole design. Our brief respite from the immediate investigation of the Star of India wreckage ended abruptly one blustery afternoon. The insistent ringing of the telegraph bell downstairs announced another blow, even before Mrs. Hudson had scurried up with the deciphered message. Holmes took the flimsy sheet, his lips tightening as he read. "Another," he stated, his voice flat, handing the telegram to me. I took it, my heart sinking. The message, from the Liverpool Constabulary, was stark: "Merchantman dreadnought consumed by fire in Liverpool docks, 0200 hours this morning. Utter loss. No survivors yet reported. Request immediate assistance, Scotland Yard." I looked up, my brow furrowed. Liverpool, Holmes? That is a considerable distance from London, and barely 4 days after the Star of India. This suggests either a network of accomplices operating across the country or a single perpetrator moving with impossible speed. "Watson," Holmes finished for me, pacing the worn Persian rug with renewed purpose. "But how? Even with the fastest express train, the timing is impossibly swift for a conventional arsonist to travel, plan, and execute such an act in such disparate locations." The geographical spread of the attacks was indeed becoming alarming. First Hull, then Bristol, London, and now Liverpool. The invisible hand orchestrating these disasters was reaching further, and its strikes were becoming more frequent. The randomness Sir Reginald Thorne had spoken of now seemed a calculated veil, drawn ever more tightly around a sinister truth. "The frequency is increasing too, Holmes," I observed, noting the dates listed for each incident on the map pinned to his wall. The intervals between the fires are shrinking. This suggests either a growing confidence on the part of the perpetrator, or perhaps a design that is building towards some climax. Holmes stopped his pacing, turning to face me, his eyes gleaming with an almost feverish intensity. Precisely, Watson. This randomness is not born of chance, but of a deliberate, Machiavellian design. Its purpose is to confound, to spread panic, to obscure the true motive beneath a smokescreen of apparent chaos. We are not dealing with a mere incendiary, but a strategist of no mean order. He picked up his pipe, tamping tobacco into its bowl with a thoughtful air. The question, my dear fellow, is not how they are starting the fires. That is a secondary mechanism we will unravel, but what is the true trigger, and who stands to benefit from such widespread devastation, beyond the obvious disruption to trade? He took a long draw from his pipe, sending a plume of acrid smoke towards the ceiling. I require fresh eyes on this Liverpool incident, Watson. Lestrade, bless his earnest soul, will simply confirm what we already know, no obvious cause, much charring. But you, my friend, possess a different sort of observation. You see, not merely what is present, but what is absent. What feels wrong in a scene, even if you cannot yet articulate why? He turned to me, his gaze penetrating. I need you to go to Liverpool. Examine the wreckage of the dreadnought. Speak to the fire marshals, the dock workers, any surviving crew. But do not merely ask the obvious questions. Look for the subtle discrepancies. The peculiar texture of the ash. The pattern of scorching that might deviate from a normal blaze. The precise location of the fire's origin within the hold, and any characteristics of the cargo, however innocuous it may seem. And pay particular attention to any unusual odors, however faint, that might linger despite the pervasive smell of smoke. I nodded, already mentally preparing for the journey. It was a testament to Holmes's trust in my faculties that he would dispatch me alone on such a crucial reconnaissance. And while you are there, my dear Watson, Holmes added, a faint smile touching his lips, observe the mood of the city. The docklands, the exchanges. Is there a sense of terror, or something more insidious? For this adversary, I suspect, is not merely interested in burning ships, but in burning away the very confidence upon which our nation's commerce rests. Go, Watson, and report back to me everything, no matter how trivial it might appear. For in the trivial, the most profound truths are often concealed. With Holmes's instructions ringing in my ears, I made arrangements for the morning train to Liverpool, knowing that the game had escalated, and that the shadows cast by the burning hulks were lengthening across the land. Chapter 4: The Unseen Hand in Glasgow. 2 weeks had passed since the Star of India met its fiery end in the London docks, a fortnight marked by a pervasive unease that settled upon the nation's commercial heart. My return from Liverpool, though swift, brought little cheer. The wreckage of the dreadnought was, as Holmes had predicted, a morbid echo of the Star of India. The same thoroughness of destruction, the same baffling absence of conventional accelerants, the same inexplicable eruption from within the vessel's hold. I reported the peculiar, slightly acrid smell I had detected, reminiscent of something metallic and faintly chemical, though it was quickly masked by the omnipresent scent of charred wood and extinguished flame. Holmes listened intently, making precise notes, but offered no immediate comment, his mind evidently already racing far ahead. The pressure mounted daily. News of the Liverpool disaster, following so closely upon the London and previous incidents in Hull and Bristol, sent ripples of fear through the shipping industry. Insurance companies teetered on the brink, threatening to hike premiums to unsustainable levels, while merchants hesitated to commit their valuable cargo to vessels that seemed destined to become floating funeral pyres. Talk of saboteurs, foreign agents, and even supernatural forces began to circulate in hushed tones, feeding a public panic that threatened to cripple British trade. Then came the inevitable, dreadful news. Just 3 days after my return, a terse telegram arrived, this time from Scotland. Another vessel, the Caledonia, had been consumed by fire in the bustling harbour of Glasgow. The pattern was now undeniable, terrifying in its relentless, accelerating rhythm. For Holmes, the news of the Caledonia served not as a setback, but as a crucible. He retreated into one of his profound intellectual phases, a period of intense study and experimentation that transformed our sitting room into a chemist's laboratory and a scholar's den. The air grew thick with the fumes of various reagents, punctuated by the scratching of his pen and the occasional, frustrated sigh. Charts of shipping lanes crisscrossed the wall, obscure scientific journals and leather-bound tomes lay open on every available surface. He consulted chemical dictionaries, obscure papers on pyrotechnics, and even ancient texts detailing alchemical processes, searching for any mention of compounds that might achieve such destructive self-ignition. I watched him, fascinated, yet often bewildered by the labyrinthine paths his mind traversed. He conducted small, controlled experiments in a basin, mixing compounds with precise measurements, observing their reactions with the fierce concentration of a hawk. He painstakingly analyzed the tiny, iridescent residue I had brought back from Liverpool, comparing it against the even smaller sample he had collected from the Star of India. Days blurred into nights, marked only by the dwindling coal in the grate and the growing pile of discarded notes. Then, late one evening, a sudden exhalation of triumph shattered the usual silence. "Watson! My dear fellow, I believe we have it!" I looked up from my book, startled. Holmes stood over his dissecting table, a microscopic slide held delicately in a pair of tweezers. His face was smudged with soot, but his eyes blazed with the light of profound discovery. "The residue," he announced, tapping the slide with a fingernail. "It is minute, almost entirely consumed by the ferocity of the blaze, but enough, just enough, for identification. It is a crystalline substance, Watson, almost metallic in its sheen, and it exhibits properties most peculiar." He paused, a dramatic flourish I had come to anticipate. "It is a synthetic compound, my dear Watson, one of the more volatile pyrophoric agents known to chemistry. Not a common substance, by any means, and certainly not one to be found naturally in a ship's hold. It requires specific conditions for its preparation and, crucially, for its activation." He explained, with a rapidity that left me struggling to keep pace, how the extremely high temperatures within the immediate epicenter of the fires, coupled with the unique burn patterns on the metal plating, pointed to an initial burst of intense, almost instantaneous heat, characteristic of this rare compound. It was designed, he deduced, to ignite with a delayed fuse, or perhaps to react to a specific environmental trigger, consuming itself almost entirely in the process, thus leaving minimal evidence. "This, Watson," Holmes declared, holding up the tiny vial containing the minuscule samples, "is our key. This is the unseen hand. Not crude arson, but a meticulously planned chemical attack. And the individual capable of deploying such a substance is no mere dockside ruffian. No, we are dealing with a mind that understands advanced chemistry, and one with a profound, personal grudge." He gazed at the maps once more, the pinheads marking the sites of destruction. The randomness was a deliberate deception, a masterstroke. Our adversary desired to create chaos, to sow confusion, to make the impossible seem merely improbable. But the chemical signature, however faint, cannot lie. The question now is not how the fires started, but who possessed the unique knowledge and the venomous intent to unleash such a sophisticated terror upon the seas. The case, which had begun with a mystery, now narrowed dramatically, focusing on the dark intersection of scientific brilliance and malicious intent. The hunt, I realized, had truly begun. Chapter 5: The Chemical Key. Holmes's pronouncement, delivered with such confident finality, sent a shiver down my spine. The vague spectres of saboteurs and foreign agents, born of public hysteria, now coalesced into a single, identifiable antagonist, a chemist. Yet, identifying the specific compound was but the first step. The true challenge lay in tracing its origin, in finding the hand that had wielded such scientific knowledge for destructive ends. For the next few days, Holmes devoted himself to the arcane world of chemical literature. He delved into journals, patents, and even unpublished dissertations, his magnifying glass hovering over complex formulae and dense paragraphs describing experimental agents. He frequented the British Museum reading room, returning laden with dusty tomes, often muttering to himself about obscure syntheses and peculiar reagents. One evening, after hours spent poring over a faded scientific periodical from a decade past, Holmes let out a sharp exclamation. "Aha! Watson, my dear fellow! The piece of the puzzle that was so conspicuously absent." He thrust an open journal into my hands. It was an edition of the Journal of Applied Chemistry, dated 10 years prior. His finger pointed to a particular article titled, "On the Synthesis and Controlled Pyrophoric Properties of Hexanitrocobaltate," authored by an E. Croft. "Read that, Watson," he commanded, his eyes alight. "Pay particular attention to the controlled properties that, it appears, were never quite controlled enough." I read, my brow furrowing as I struggled with the technical jargon. The article described a highly volatile, self-igniting compound, stable only under very specific conditions, but capable of generating immense, instantaneous heat upon exposure to air or slight agitation. Croft had proposed its use in various niche industrial applications, particularly for rapid ignition in inaccessible areas. However, the article concluded with a rather stark disclaimer about its extreme instability and the difficulty in mass production without significant risk. "This Croft fellow," I mused, he sounds brilliant, yet perhaps a little reckless. Brilliant, indeed, Watson, Holmes confirmed, pacing the room with renewed energy. But also, as you rightly surmise, reckless. And, I have discovered, utterly disgraced. Holmes then unveiled the tragic trajectory of Elias Croft. A visionary, yet mercurial chemist, Croft had indeed tried to commercialize his pyrophoric compound. He had approached several prominent shipping magnates, including Sir James Grayson, a director of the company that owned the Atlantic Star, and a consortium of insurance firms, proposing his compound for controlled demolition or emergency signaling. However, the compound's inherent instability, coupled with a highly publicized, albeit minor, laboratory accident, led to its universal rejection. Croft was labeled a maverick, his work deemed too dangerous for practical application. The shipping consortium, backed by the major insurance houses, publicly dismissed his findings, effectively blackballing him from further investment, Holmes explained, tapping the article. His reputation was shattered. His patents were deemed commercially unviable. He lost everything, his laboratory, his savings, even his home. He descended into a bitter obscurity, nursing a profound resentment towards the very institutions that he believed had stifled his genius and ruined his life. A cold comprehension began to dawn on me. So, this isn't about profit, or even mere destruction, Holmes. It's about revenge. Precisely, Watson, Holmes affirmed, his voice grave. This is not the work of a common criminal motivated by lucre, but of a broken man seeking to dismantle the edifice that crushed him. He wants to prove them wrong, not merely by causing damage, but by creating a chaos so profound that it undermines the very foundations of their industry. The randomness was his masterstroke, designed to suggest a problem so diffuse and untraceable that no insurance policy could ever cover it, no shipping line could ever mitigate it. He is striking at the very confidence of maritime commerce, a confidence he believes was unjustly denied to him. Holmes laid out a map of Britain, marking the locations of the burned ships. Hull, Bristol, London, Liverpool, Glasgow. Each pin seemed to represent a direct assault on the economic arteries of the nation, and, more personally, an act of retribution against the system that had rejected Elias Croft. He is a genius of a peculiar and dangerous kind, Watson, Holmes concluded, his expression grim. His ambition, once directed towards innovation, has curdled into a potent poison of vengeance. He has spent a decade perfecting his method, not for profit, but for the satisfaction of seeing his tormentors brought to their knees. And now, he has unleashed it upon them. Our task is not merely to catch an arsonist, but to apprehend a mind that believes it is enacting a righteous retribution, armed with a science that few understand and fewer still can counter. Chapter 6: The Mechanism of Destruction. The identification of Elias Croft as the probable orchestrator of this maritime terror brought a new, chilling clarity to the case. Holmes's mind, no longer grappling with the elusive who and what, now bent its formidable energies towards the how. The pyrophoric compound, he reasoned, could not simply be tossed onto a deck, its precise activation required a more sophisticated delivery. Consider, Watson, Holmes began, gesturing with his ever-present pipe, a plume of smoke curling towards the ceiling. Croft's compound is volatile, highly reactive. It needs to be contained, protected, and then precisely exposed to the necessary conditions for ignition. This suggests a device, small and inconspicuous, capable of holding the substance and initiating its reaction. He spread before us various diagrams he had sketched, illustrating potential mechanisms. A small casing, perhaps, made of a non-reactive material. A cap that dissolves, or a thin membrane that ruptures under certain conditions, a change in atmospheric pressure at sea, a significant vibration, or even a simple, delayed chemical fuse set to a specific time. The cunning lies in the subtlety, the way it blends with the commonplace. The randomness of the fires now took on a deeper layer of meaning. Croft wasn't merely striking ships at random, but rather choosing vessels where his small, insidious devices could be planted with minimal fuss, perhaps disguised as part of the regular cargo, or during routine maintenance. The key, Holmes continued, is not merely the device, but its placement. How does Croft get these onto the ships without detection? He himself cannot be present at every port. Therefore, he requires an intermediary, someone who, wittingly or unwittingly, serves as his instrument. Our next task, therefore, was to locate this instrument. Holmes turned his attention from chemical equations to human equations. He acquired lists of dock workers and casual laborers employed at the various ports where the fires had occurred, cross-referencing them with Croft's known associates from his earlier, legitimate career. This yielded nothing. Croft, a man nursing a decade of bitter resentment, had carefully cut ties with his past. However, Holmes's methods were never confined to the obvious. He began to investigate Croft's financial situation, his recent movements, and any unusual expenses or income. It was through a meticulous review of pawn shop records and obscure betting ledgers in the East End that a name began to surface with peculiar regularity, a certain Silas Marrow, a dock worker known for his gambling debts and a peculiar habit of always being present at the specific docks where the targeted ships had recently been berthed, despite not being officially assigned there. Silas Marrow, Holmes murmured, tracing the name with his finger on a grubby ledger page. A man with a taste for cards and an always empty purse. He works casual shifts, moving from port to port wherever the work is. Perfect. He is not intelligent enough to question the cargo, only desperate enough to accept a few extra shillings for an odd job, perhaps moving a special package or ensuring a fragile container is placed in a particular hold, unnoticed by the usual supervisors. Holmes theorized that Croft, a master of manipulation, had preyed upon Marrow's financial weakness. Marrow would be given a small, heavy package, told it was a highly sensitive instrument, or perhaps a sample of a new, valuable commodity, needing precise placement. He would be paid handsomely for his discretion, never knowing the true, explosive nature of his deliveries. This accounted for the devices being placed deep within the holds, amongst the very cargo destined for combustion. With the how and the who of the accomplice falling into place, Holmes's attention pivoted to the final, most urgent puzzle, the when and where of the next strike. Croft's motive was revenge against the shipping establishment. He wasn't merely burning ships, he was sending a message. His victims are chosen not at random, Watson, but with a precise, though obscured, logic, Holmes declared, now surrounded by maps again, this time highlighted with the names of prominent shipping lines and their directors. He targets those who scorned him. Sir James Grayson, for instance, a vocal critic of Croft's compound, was instrumental in blocking its commercialization. Grayson's company owns the Atlantic Star, a flagship vessel. It is a logical, symbolic target. He consulted a shipping gazette, his eye scanning schedules. The Atlantic Star is due to depart from Southampton for New York in 3 days' time. It represents the pinnacle of British maritime engineering and commerce. Its destruction would be a devastating blow, not merely financially, but to the nation's pride. A grim certainty settled over Holmes's features. Croft's escalating tempo suggests he is building to a grand crescendo. The Atlantic Star would be his magnum opus of destruction, a final, definitive act of vengeance against the system that dared to dismiss his genius. We must assume that Silas Marrow, or another like him, has already received his instructions. The device, or devices, will already be aboard. He looked up, his grey eyes piercing the gloom of the gas-lit room. The trap must be set, Watson, and quickly. For if my deductions are correct, the Atlantic Star is sailing towards an inferno, and we have precious little time to divert its course. Chapter 7: The Net is Cast. With the identity of Elias Croft established and his diabolical method laid bare, the race against time began in earnest. Holmes wasted no time. A telegram, coded and urgent, was dispatched to Sir Reginald Thorne at the Admiralty, followed by a brusque summons for Lestrade. The sitting room at Baker Street became a war council chamber, map of Southampton spread upon the table, shipping schedules marked with red ink. The Atlantic Star, Holmes declared, tapping a formidable finger upon the chosen vessel's entry. Her departure from Southampton is scheduled for tomorrow at noon. This is our window. Croft, I am certain, will view her destruction as his ultimate triumph, a final, crushing blow to those who scorned him. Lestrade, though still struggling to fully grasp the intricacies of pyrophoric compounds and chemical vengeance, understood the gravity of the situation. You mean to use her as bait, Holmes? Risk a vessel of that size? Not risk, Inspector, but protect, Holmes corrected, his eyes glinting. We shall anticipate his move, not merely react to it. The Atlantic Star will sail, but under our watchful eye. Every plank, every rivet, every shadow will be scrutinized. Sir Reginald Thorne, having arrived with a contingent of naval intelligence officers, listened with a mixture of apprehension and admiration. The plan Holmes outlined was audacious, requiring absolute discretion and meticulous coordination. The Atlantic Star would be prepared for a seemingly routine departure, yet every inch of her and the surrounding dock area would be under intense, albeit covert, surveillance. Our journey to Southampton that evening was swift, a private railway carriage rushing us through the darkened countryside. Upon arrival, the docks were a hive of subdued activity, the great liner looming like a slumbering leviathan. Teams from Scotland Yard, supplemented by a few trusted Admiralty men, were already being briefed under Lestrade's stern gaze. My own role was assigned with characteristic Holmesian precision. "You, Watson, shall secure passage on the Atlantic Star," he instructed. "Under the guise of a returning traveler, of course. Your task will be to observe the crew, the last-minute cargo being loaded, and the general atmosphere aboard. Pay particular attention to any individuals who seem unduly nervous or overly interested in the ship's internal workings. Your medical bag provides an excellent pretext for discreet movement." I confess, a flutter of unease stirred within me. To be aboard a ship known to be targeted, carrying a hidden, volatile payload, was not a prospect I relished. Yet, Holmes's conviction was infectious, and the importance of the mission undeniable. Lestrade's men, meanwhile, were deployed throughout the sprawling docklands. Plainclothes constables mingled with dock workers, while others took up positions in warehouses and atop cranes, their eyes scanning for Silas Marrow, or indeed, any unfamiliar face that seemed too interested in the Atlantic Star. The specific entry points, the loading gangways, the shadowed corners where a small device might be hastily placed, all were under a vigilant, if unseen, watch. Holmes himself, ever the master of disguise, took up a strategic vantage point. By the time dawn broke, he had vanished, only to reappear hours later as a grizzled, taciturn stevedore, a clay pipe clenched between his teeth, his eyes, however, missing nothing amidst the chaotic bustle of the docks. From his position, he could observe the various movements, the final cargo being hoisted aboard, the last passengers boarding, the preparations of the tugboats. His gaze was particularly fixed on any small, innocuous packages that might be handled with unusual care, or by individuals who seemed to possess a surreptitious air. The morning hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. The air, usually alive with the cries of gulls and the clamor of commerce, seemed heavy with an unspoken dread. A light mist rolled in from the Solent, wrapping the great liner in a ghostly shroud, only adding to the suspense. Every whistle, every distant shout, every clang of metal against metal seemed amplified, a potential signal for disaster. I, aboard the Atlantic Star, feigned interest in a book in the saloon, my ears, however, straining for any unusual sound, my eyes darting across the faces of my fellow passengers and the busy crew. The stewards moved with professional efficiency, the passengers with anticipatory excitement, oblivious to the deadly game being played out around them. Below decks, I knew, other members of the police and navy were silently conducting their own search, their movements disguised as routine inspections. The clock ticked towards noon. The tugboats began to nudge the colossal hull. The gangways were about to be raised. The tension became almost unbearable. Holmes, from his vantage point on the quay, remained utterly still, his eyes two burning points of concentration. He knew that Croft, a man of precise planning, would choose the optimum moment for his strike. The question was, had he already acted, or was he waiting for a final, terrifying flourish? The net was cast, tight and invisible, but the predator, we knew, was equally cunning, equally patient. The fate of the Atlantic Star, and perhaps the confidence of an empire, hung precariously in the balance. Chapter 8: The Catch and the Unraveling. The great clock tower on the Southampton docks chimed 11 bells, signaling half an hour until the Atlantic Star's scheduled departure. The air thrummed with a nervous energy, a blend of excitement from the departing passengers and a palpable tension from those of us privy to the hidden danger. The mist, which had veiled the earlier morning, now began to recede, revealing the bustling quay in starker detail. Aboard the ship, I found myself increasingly restless. I had seen nothing amiss, no suspicious packages, no overly anxious crewmen. The internal search, conducted discreetly by Lestrade's men, had yielded no sign of Croft's insidious devices. Had Holmes been mistaken? Had the randomness truly been random, after all? Just as the final gangway was about to be drawn, a figure detached itself from the milling crowd on the quay. He was clad in the nondescript uniform of a common seaman, cap pulled low, face obscured by a thick, dark beard. He moved with an unusual purpose, his gaze fixed not upon the majestic liner, but upon a specific point on the dock's edge, near where a small, late consignment of mail bags was being loaded. From the subtle hunch of his shoulders and the nervous flick of his eyes, I instantly recognized him as the type Holmes had described, the mastermind, now disguised, come to witness his final, crowning act of vengeance. My eye scanned the dock, searching for Holmes. He was nowhere to be seen. A moment of panic flared. Was Croft about to trigger the device, perhaps remotely? Then, as the disguised seaman made a slight, almost imperceptible movement, raising his hand towards his chest as if to adjust his coat, two figures emerged from the shadows beneath a stack of crates. They moved with the silent, predatory speed of leopards. One, a burly dock worker, seized the seaman from behind, clamping an iron grip over his arms. The other, an elderly, stooped man with a shock of white hair, moved in front, his features suddenly transforming. The beard was torn away, the cap tossed aside, revealing the hawk-like profile and piercing eyes of Sherlock Holmes. The false seaman struggled violently, a guttural cry of rage escaping his lips. It was Elias Croft. In his hand, as it was wrestled from his grasp by the burly figure, Lestrade, now divested of his constable's uniform, was a small, ornate pocket watch. Its face was not for time, but bore a single, tiny, red button. Holmes, his expression grimly triumphant, held aloft a similar, but empty, device, taken from Croft's possession moments before. The self-destruct mechanism, Mr. Croft, Holmes stated, his voice clear and ringing in the sudden hush that had fallen over the immediate area. Your fail-safe. Should the primary device fail, you intended to manually activate it by this remote trigger, ensuring the Atlantic Star still met her fate. A final flourish of your genius, ruined by your inability to resist observing your handiwork. Croft, now subdued, snarled, his eyes burning with a hatred that was terrifying to behold. How did you know? The devices, they were perfect. Untraceable. Indeed, Mr. Croft, Holmes conceded, allowing himself a rare, sardonic smile. Almost perfect. Your brilliance in chemical engineering is undeniable. Your error lay in your psychology. A genius of your caliber, driven by such a profound sense of injustice, would never be content to merely set a mechanism and walk away. You needed to see the destruction, to feel the vindication. And that, Mr. Croft, was your undoing." The Atlantic Star, her gangways now fully retracted, slowly began to pull away from the quay, her great engines churning. The catastrophe had been averted. The passengers, unaware of the deadly drama that had just unfolded, waved gaily from the decks. Hours later, back in the familiar comfort of Baker Street, with Lestrade looking on in a mixture of awe and bewilderment, Holmes laid out the full tapestry of his deductions. A small, unlit coal fire flickered in the grate, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Croft's method, Holmes began, tapping a specific section of a chemical diagram, relied on a small, sealed device containing his highly pyrophoric hexanitrocobaltate. This device had a double activation. The primary mechanism was a slow-acting acid capsule, designed to eat through a thin membrane, exposing the compound to air after approximately 2 weeks. This explained the seemingly random delays between fires. However, for a larger, more crucial target like the Atlantic Star, Croft built in a secondary, remote trigger, a small, concealed radio transmitter within a seemingly innocuous object, disguised, in this case, as a pocket watch. This was his fail-safe, his way of guaranteeing the explosion should the primary timer fail, or should he wish to accelerate the schedule. But how did he get the devices on board? Lestrade interjected, still struggling with the sheer audacity of it all. Through Silas Marrow, as we deduced, Holmes explained. Marrow, driven by gambling debts, was paid a sum to plant special packages, the devices, deep within the holds of selected vessels. He was told they were highly sensitive barometric instruments for scientific study, needing careful, undisturbed placement. His greed blinded him to the true nature of his cargo. We apprehended Marrow in Glasgow shortly after the Caledonia incident, and he, unaware of the full scope of Croft's design, provided enough details to confirm our theory about the placement. However, he knew nothing of the remote triggers. The Atlantic Star, I added, had been meticulously searched, yet no device was found. Because it was no longer there, Holmes explained, a glint in his eye. When we deduced that the Atlantic Star was the next target, we contacted Sir Reginald Thorne. His men, disguised as cargo inspectors, conducted a covert search of the vessel before the remote activation window. They found and safely neutralized Croft's device, replacing it with an inert decoy. The challenge then was to catch Croft in the act, or at least in the belief that his plan had succeeded. Croft, a meticulous planner, would have pre-programmed his remote activator based on the vessel's departure time. My observation from the docks confirmed he was waiting for the final moments, watching the last of the cargo being loaded. He would then, with a twisted sense of accomplishment, activate the device. It was his moment of triumph. We simply waited for him to betray his presence, lured by the irresistible temptation of witnessing his revenge. Lestrade slowly shook his head. And the randomness of the ports, Holmes. A calculated deception, Inspector. By striking at different ports, with varying intervals, he created a pattern of chaos designed to obscure any discernible motive or method, leading authorities to chase phantoms across the country. It was meant to demoralize, to spread fear, and to ultimately ensure that the true perpetrator remained an unseen hand. The Atlantic star was safe, and the maritime terror that had plagued the nation was at an end. As for Elias Croft, his genius, twisted by resentment and a desire for vengeance, had finally led him to a cell. I looked at Holmes, calmly puffing on his pipe, the case already receding into the labyrinthine corridors of his mind. The gas lamps of Baker Street once again cast their familiar glow, but for a brief, terrifying period, they had illuminated the dark shadow of a man's obsession, held at bay only by the unparalleled brilliance of my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. The game, once dangerous and complex, was truly over.